Okay, this is segment one. I'm going to talk about the oil paints that I use, why I use them, some of the things that might be good or bad about these particular paints. First off, water-soluble oil paints, they're not a perfect replacement for real oil paints. They don't react the same. They react a little bit different. And I'll get a little bit into that in one of these next few videos, but I'm just going to go over the colors and some of the different brands and what qualities the paints have and what I use them for. I don't use the most expensive paints out there. There are an abundance of different brands and manufacturers and stuff like that. But when you step into the water-soluble stuff, it tends to be a little bit more limited. But I do buy high-quality paints for when I need high-quality paints, and I use lesser quality, or not even necessarily lesser quality, but less expensive paints for larger areas or less important areas that don't need the color saturations and the vitality that the high-quality paints are used for. So here's really quick, really quick. I'll just go through some of these. This right here is Phthalo blue and Prussian blue. Prussian. Prussian is actually one that I don't really use. I kind of ended up with it for some reason or another. I think I accidentally ordered it. I wouldn't recommend using it because Prussian blue tends to fade with time. So let's stay away from that. But Phthalo blue, this is a Lucas Phthalo, and honestly, it seems to work just fine. The Lucas, there was a Phthalo from Winsor & Newton that I did not like. It didn't seem to have the correct pigment. It just didn't feel right. It didn't mix right for me. So I used the Lucas with that. Next, French Ultramarine Blue. I also use a cheap Winsor & Newton or the Lucas with French Ultramarine Blue, and I'll tell you why. Because honestly, I don't see that big a difference between the expensive ones and the cheaper ones. They just don't act that different to me. And the same thing is actually true with a lot of the burnt siennas and the burnt umber and the yellow ochre. I find that there's some paints that just aren't that big a deal to use cheaper because they don't change that much. Now, with that, there is one little caveat that some of them are not well blended or well ground up. I have found some paints that tend to be a little bit grainy, a little gritty. But as long as you find a nice consistency, they seem to be just fine. And this goes for normal oil paints as well as water soluble. It seems like, at least for me, the ultramarines, the siennas, they seem to be kind of the same. Alright, now move to the whites. To me, white makes a huge difference. I use 3 different whites. I use the Lucas brand, the Winsor & Newton, and the titanium white from Holbein. And the Holbein is significantly more expensive. But this Holbein white is just phenomenal. It, as far as water soluble goes, it cannot be replaced. It is fantastic. It's opaque. It retains its color quality, its vitality. It just works fantastic. I can't say enough good about this titanium white from Holbein. It's an Aqua Duo. I also use the Winsor & Newton and the Lucas, and I'll tell you why. The Lucas is a really thin consistency, and that works a lot for, when I'm trying to build up stuff and when I want that really ooey gooey stuff, and I'm not mixing a whole lot, I use that. The Winsor & Newton it's actually kind of sorry Winsor & Newton, but it's kind of a crappier paint. It doesn't have that strength of character that I like to have in most of my whites, and that's the reason I use it, actually, is because I do a lot of glazing, and it's almost like a semi-transparent white. So if you're looking to do any glazing and you don't want to thin it out nearly as much, go with a cheaper paint. This stuff, it takes a while to get that stuff to shine, to show through. So anyway, I use all 3 of those. Next up, this one's kind of cool. It's a Cinnabar green. It's just a color that I play around with a little bit. I don't really have any input on that. It's an okay color. It works. Next, I've come down here to the cadmium hues. Now, a lot of people will not use the hues. I do. I use them a lot, actually. And part of the reason I do that is because there's no cadmium in them, and it's not going to kill me. Now, they do not retain their vitality, and they go muddy really, really quickly. So, be extra careful when you use something like this, because it will destroy your painting if you don't know what you're doing and how to use it. That said, as long as you're mixing with one, I mean, if you're using these close to being straight, mixing with white, mixing with maybe one other color, they work okay. But they're not going to create the gorgeous colors that you're looking for. They're just muddy paints, and that's what happens. And that is actually why I use these along with some of the real cadmiums, because sometimes I want muddy, and sometimes you know, because if you put something that has not a very strong color note next to something that does, the thing that does really pops, and that really can actually be a technique that's very useful. Okay, next up, oh, and before I move on, these really do have a lack of color strength. They really do. They mud up real fast. Next up are some of the higher quality paints. This is the Lucas. It's a cadmium red. It's real cadmium. It's not a great cadmium. I apologize to Lucas. It does not have that strength of character that I expect from a real cadmium. That said, it's better than my cadmium hue. This one gets really muddy quick for a cadmium. I don't know why, but it does. But it is better, and it's a lot cheaper than my Holbein, so I do use it. But if I'm trying to get red, or I'm trying to mix some colors that really create awesome, you know, vital, you know, poignant colors, this is the one I use, the Aqua Duo by Holbein. It might not be quite as great as some of the high-end traditional oils, but it's pretty dang good. As is the cadmium yellow from Holbein. These two are just fantastic colors. Fantastic. As is the quinacridone. Now, I actually prefer alizarin crimson to quinacridone, but a few years ago they kind of got into it with alizarin crimson, that if it's not alizarin crimson permanent, it tends to fade over, I don't know, 100 years or something like that. So quinacridone has kind of become a replacement for that. So the quinacridone, while it has a little bit more of a, almost like a tinny feel to it, I don't know how to explain that. It's got a little bit different feel to it than the alizarin crimson. Alizarin crimson seems to have more richness, and quinacridone is a little, you know, closer to the, I don't even know how to call it, but it's just not quite as rich, it seems like, as the alizarin crimson, but still a really great color, and retains its color brilliance, and it's supposed to last 100 years, so that's great, or even more so. Now I move to, these are the Martin colors. Martin Weber. I do not like these. They actually were on clearance at Hobby Lobby, and I picked them all up. They just don't do what they need to do, and they dry funny, and they mix funny. They're just weird paints. I do not care for them at all. Anyway, I think that's about it for these colors.